He always opened the doors just before the sun had fully risen. Dust floated in golden shafts of morning light, slipping through the warped windows like ghosts too polite to knock. The saloon creaked under the weight of another empty day. Its wood, worn and dry, groaned softly as if waking reluctantly. Glasses sat untouched on shelves that hadn't been wiped in months, maybe years. The floorboards remembered boots that no longer stepped. Chairs waited for men who never came. A single piano leaned against the wall, one key forever stuck in silence. And behind the long bar, under the same wide-brimmed hat and faded red kerchief, stood the cowboy alone, as always, 18 years. Every day the same rhythm: unlock the doors, sweep the dust, though more always returned, light the lamp, brew a single pot of coffee, strong and bitter, pour one cup, sit at the third stool. From the right, he didn't talk. There was no one to talk to. But sometimes he'd mutter something under his breath, half words. Maybe a name, maybe a memory too old to hold. The saloon stood on the edge of a town that had once mattered. Trails used to fork here, wagons rested, stagecoaches paused, horses drank from the trough out front. Now the signs had faded and the maps ignored it. Newer roads went elsewhere. No travelers came through. No fights, no laughter, no songs. And yet, he stayed. He had never once placed a closed sign on the door. Locals sometimes whispered about him in the only cafe still open down the street. That saloon's been dead since the fire. He's waiting for ghosts. Some say his bride died in there, the day before the wedding, but no one ever asked him directly. They didn't go in. They didn't want to know, and he never invited them. What little he needed, he bought quietly. Flour, coffee, lamp oil. Once a week, always on Thursdays. He nodded, but never smiled. His boots were always clean, his shirt buttoned to the neck, as though he still expected company. As though the past might walk in with a gust of wind. The mirrors behind the bar had long since cracked, but he still wiped them every morning. Not for himself, for someone else. Every now and then, the wind would blow the saloon doors open. Just for a second, he'd look up. Just in case. No one came. Not for 18 years. But still, every single morning, he opened those doors. Because promises, even when no one remembers them, have weight. And some men are built to carry them. In silence. Sometimes at night, when the wind whistled low across the plains, he'd sit by the window with a candle lit low, watching shadows move across the horizon. He wasn't sure if he was hoping to see someone, or hoping no one ever did. The loneliness wasn't new. It had settled inside him like old dust on the... They watched him from a distance, always from a distance. The townsfolk had long given up asking questions. Curiosity had turned to myth, and myth to silence. He had become part of the scenery, like the rusted sign above the saloon, like the empty hitching post that hadn't held a horse in years. No one really knew why he stayed. Some said he was waiting. Others claimed he had nowhere else to go. A few whispered he had made a promise, the kind that couldn't be broken without breaking. A soul. But if you asked him directly, kindly, he would only nod once and look past you, toward the far wall of the saloon. There, above the cracked wallpaper, and beneath a thin film of dust, hung a single photograph. It wasn't framed, just pinned to the wall with a bent nail. The edges curled, the image faded. But you could still see them, two figures standing outside the very same saloon, younger, smiling. One was clearly him decades ago. The other was her. No name was ever spoken, no story told. But every day, when the first light slipped through the swinging doors, he'd glance at that photo before unlocking the bolts, as if asking it for permission or forgiveness. Sometimes he'd sit in the back corner, beneath that photograph, sipping slowly from a chipped mug, staring at the wall. Not at the photo, not directly, but just beside it, as if watching something. that no one else could see. A shadow. A memory. A mistake. No one remembered her name, or maybe they had never known. The women in town guessed she was a traveler. She played piano. She left him. She died in the fire. Stories changed, depending on who told them, and how late the hour was, but he never corrected them. He never said a word, even when children would sneak up to the windows and press their noses against the glass, hoping to catch a glimpse of the ghostly bartender. He ignored them. He'd just wipe the bar, polish the same glass, and look at that photo like it was all that kept the walls from crumbling down. The saloon itself felt suspended in time. Outside, the world moved on new roads, new faces, new stories. But inside, it was always 4:10 in the afternoon. Sunlight slanting just right across the empty stools, casting long shadows that reached toward the photo on the wall. What held him? There, no one could say, but everyone knew not to ask. And even if they did, he wouldn't answer, because some griefs do not grow louder with time. They only grow quieter and heavier. At night, he'd sometimes wind the old wall clock, though. It hadn't worked in years. The tick it once carried still echoed in his mind. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the sound of a life that once had rhythm. Now silence filled that space like fog. Once, long ago, someone left a note under the saloon door. Just one line written in hurried pencil. I forgive you, but I can't come back. He never threw it away. He folded it once. Each morning began with the same sound, the slow creak of wooden floorboards as the cowboy pushed open the swinging saloon doors. Dust motes danced in the air like ghosts stirred from sleep. The light came in soft, angling through the cracks. In the warped shutters, landing on tables no one had sat at in years. He stepped inside like he was stepping into memory. There were no footprints to sweep, but he swept them anyway. The floor, the corners, the same path between the front door and the long bar. He wiped down the counter, polished each bottle, realigned the stools. He'd lift each glass and hold it to the light, checking for smudges no one would ever see. Outside, the world changed with the seasons. Inside, the world refused to move. The chairs always creaked in the same places. The same floorboard near the back room always groaned beneath his step. Sometimes he'd pause and press his boot down twice just to hear the familiar sound again, as if it were confirming something, that he was still there. That time hadn't swallowed him whole. He lit a single lamp behind the bar, even in daylight. He liked the warmth of it, how it caught the copper edges of the whiskey bottles, making them glow like old memories. Then he'd stand behind the counter, arms folded, watching the front door, not expecting it to open, not really, but watching. Still, some mornings, he made coffee. Other days, it was tea, sometimes just hot water in a cracked tin mug. He'd sit in the second seat from the left, never the first, never the third, and sip slowly, eyes scanning the room like a host preparing for guests who never arrived. And yet, there was a rhythm to it. A reverence. It was as if the act of preparing the saloon, cleaning, arranging, waiting, was a ritual. A quiet devotion, like church, but lonelier. Or like prayer, but to someone who hadn't answered in nearly 2 decades. He never looked bored. He never looked tired. He moved through the empty space with purpose, with care. As if someone had once told him, keep it ready. And he took those words to heart. The calendar on the wall still read 1889. The piano in the corner remained closed, keys covered in a faded red cloth. He never touched it. Not once in 18 years, not even to dust. It had belonged to her, the one from the photograph. No one else had ever played it, not before, not after. Some nights, as dusk melted into evening, he would light one more lamp and adjust the mirrors behind the bar. He'd angle them just right, so they reflected the doorway. That way, if someone came in, he wouldn't have to turn around. He'd already know it was a Thursday. Not that it mattered. The days had long stopped meaning anything inside the walls of the saloon. But the cowboy still kept track, not by calendar, but by habit. Thursdays had a certain weight to them, a certain stillness in the air, like even the sky was holding its breath. That morning had been like any other. He'd swept the floor, oiled the hinges, wiped the bar, the same way he had done for nearly 18 years. He adjusted the photograph on the wall, not because it had moved, but because it felt like something he needed to do. He made coffee he wouldn't drink, opened windows no one looked through. Outside, the wind stood still. Inside, memory did the walking. It happened in the late afternoon, just before the sun dipped behind the dry hills and turned the saloon's floorboards amber. The light was soft, the kind that makes you believe in ghosts. And then, a sound. A creak. The kind of creak the front doors made when someone pushed gently, hesitantly through them. Not a slam. Not a gust of wind. Just ... Deliberate movement. Intent. The cowboy froze mid-wipe, cloth in hand, heart caught in that place between disbelief and memory. He waited for the second sound. Boots on floorboards. Maybe a voice, but none came. He turned toward the entrance. The doors were swaying ever so slightly, but no one stood there. He walked slowly, deliberately, the way someone approaches a memory they don't want to scare off. The doors eased back into stillness behind him. The street outside was empty. No riders, no tracks, no dust kicked up in departure. But when he stepped back inside, she was there. In the far corner of the saloon, where the light barely reached, and the air always felt colder. A woman no more than a silhouette sat motionless in a chair that hadn't groaned under weight in years. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But her presence was a sound all its own. He didn't recognize her face, but he recognized her being, like déjà vu soaked in sorrow. Her hair was pulled back, her shoulders wrapped in fabric too soft to name. Her hands rested in her lap, still as winter water. She looked straight ahead, past him, past the bar, toward something long gone. He blinked. Gone. Just like that. The chair rocked once, then settled. Dust, disturbed by nothing visible, danced through the air and caught the dying light. He stood there a long time, not breathing, not speaking, just watching the space she'd left behind, as if staring long enough might bring her back. But the saloon was empty again, only it didn't feel the same. That night he didn't light one lamp. He lit two. He placed one at the bar, and the other on that far. The morning after the woman appeared, if she truly had, the cowboy awoke earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much. Maybe he hadn't slept at all. The saloon felt heavier, as if it had breathed in the night and held something inside. Something that didn't belong to sleep or memory. He lit the stove, made the coffee, let it burn just enough to fill the air with that bitter scent he was used to. He folded the rag, lined the bottles, polished one glass more than the rest. Routine like always, but something felt off. It wasn't until he turned to the main room that he noticed the chairs. There were 13 chairs lined against the far wall, the ones that hadn't moved in nearly a decade. The ones he had pushed back years ago, out of the way, never expecting anyone to use them again. Now, they were arranged differently, not messily, not scattered, but placed precisely, each one facing the bar at a slight angle, as if turned by someone just about to sit or someone who already had. A few were closer to the table than others. One had a coat draped over it, his coat, but he hadn't touched it since winter. He walked slowly across the creaking floorboards, eyes flicking between the chairs. No signs of entry, no footprints in the thin layer of dust by the door. No smudges on the glass, no latches undone. Still, someone had been there. He could feel it. There was a faint smell in the air, lavender, maybe, or sage. Something old, warm, and sorrowful. Like the scent of a letter opened after too many years. He ran his fingers along the back of one chair. The wood was warm. Too warm. He checked the door again. Locked, just as he'd left it. He checked the windows, latched. Everything appeared untouched. But the room itself disagreed. The air carried a pulse, the way it does in a church when someone lights a candle and whispers a name. He didn't rearrange the chairs. He couldn't. Instead, he made more coffee. Brought out 13 mismatched cups, placed one at each chair. No sound but the clink of ceramic and the low groan of wood as he moved. Between them, he didn't know why he did it. It just felt correct. Right. Like something had begun, and this was the only way to meet it properly. As he returned to the bar, he noticed one last thing. The photograph. The one he always straightened every morning. It had tilted slightly. Only a few degrees. But he hadn't touched it. Not that day. Not yet. He let it stay crooked. That night, he sat in the dark once again, the saloon now echoing with the memory of movement. Of shifting chairs, of soft footsteps that left no prints. Of guess who entered without knocking. And he whispered, not to himself, but to the room. 13. Not a question, a count. It was always quiet at that hour. 3 in the morning. The kind of silence that didn't just fall over the town, it pressed into the bones of buildings, sank into the grain of the wooden floorboards, and lingered in the spaces between candlelight and shadow. The saloon wasn't just still. It was listening. The cowboy, as he did every night now, sat at the bar with the oil lamp turned low. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he didn't pour a fresh one. He just waited. Not with expectation. With certainty. Something always stirred at this hour, and tonight it came again. There was no sound of footsteps, no creak of the saloon doors. But he knew in that part of the chest where instinct beats louder than thought, that someone had entered. He turned his head slowly toward the far table, the one by the cracked window that hadn't been touched in years. She was already sitting there. A woman, perhaps in her 30s, with long black hair braided down one side. Her coat looked like it belonged to another era, stitched with care, worn at the elbows. Her hat sat on the table beside her, its brim dusted with faint desert red. She did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the candle flickering at the center of the table. He rose from the bar. The saloon, which always groaned when he walked, made no noise now. As if the walls had agreed to silence. As if the room had become sacred. He approached slowly. She lifted her head. Her face was neither joyful nor sorrowful. It carried something deeper, a memory that had never been spoken aloud. And when she spoke, it was as if the wind outside had been waiting to carry the words. "We were waiting for you." The sentence held. No tension, no demand. Just the gentle weight of truth, long delayed. Then without movement, without warning, she was gone. Not like someone leaving a room, like someone dissolving into the fabric of a dream. He stood at the table, frozen. His eyes traced the candle's dance, then slowly lowered to the place where she'd been sitting. There on the old pine tabletop lay a necklace, a silver chain, delicate and dulled with age. At its center, a turquoise stone wrapped in copper. Wire, beneath it, a tiny medallion carved with a symbol he didn't recognize. He didn't touch it. Not yet. He pulled out the chair opposite hers and sat, elbows on the table, eyes locked on the necklace as if it might whisper something he'd forgotten. There was a warmth to it. Not heat but presence. The kind of warmth that stays in a room after someone you love leaves. The kind of warmth that tells you something once real has passed through again. He poured a small glass of water and set it beside the necklace. A ritual, though he didn't know why. And then he spoke, not loudly, not to the room exactly, but to that thin veil between silence and memory. "I'll keep the door open." He stayed there for a long time, not thinking, not questioning, just listening. Because in that moment, the cowboy knew this was only the beginning. And the hour of 3, had claimed him. The nights grew heavier. As if the air around the saloon had begun to remember. The cowboy no longer questioned the clock. He simply woke before it struck 3, lit the lantern with a steady hand, wiped down the bar even if no dust had fallen, and unlocked the front door without expecting wind or footsteps. But they came anyway, one by one, each night, as predictable as the darkness, yet as strange as a story no one ever finishes. The second woman arrived in silence. She wore a wide-brimmed hat with a faded feather tucked into the band, and her dress was the color of ash after rain. She walked to the far table, sat where the first woman had, and said only, "We've been waiting." She placed nothing on the fun table, but when she stood to leave, there was the faint scent of lavender and smoke, and the bar mirror had fogged over as if someone had leaned close and exhaled a forgotten name. The third came barefoot. Her shawl trailed behind her like memory, and her eyes never met his. She simply nodded once and sat. Same table, same hour, same hush. Her presence filled the room not with sound, but with weight. She whispered the same words, then vanished before dawn, but left behind a single silver ring, resting perfectly on the rim of an untouched glass. The cowboy began setting the table. Before they arrived now, a candle. An empty glass. A space where silence could sit without shame. And they kept coming. Each woman different. One in a tattered riding coat, one with mud on her boots, one with pearls too clean for this town, one with a scar above her lip, one with a laugh that never made it past her breath, but all said the same thing: "We've been waiting for you." Number. More, no less. They never answered questions. He stopped asking after the fourth, but with every visit, the saloon changed. It smelled less of dust and more of pine. The piano's highest note, long thought broken, echoed again one morning without a touch. The light through the windows looked warmer, though the nights outside stayed just as cold. He counted them without needing to. By the 7th night, 7 chairs were used, 7 glasses rinsed and dried, 7 names he didn't know but could feel in the grain of the bar. He didn't write them down. He didn't speak them, but he remembered the faces, and he remembered their eyes. None were accusing, none were lost. All of them familiar. He could no longer recall the last time a man had entered this place. The saloon had become something else now, a place outside time. A room filled with a quiet, pulsing truth. He wasn't alone. He hadn't been for a long time. And whatever this was, it was only just beginning. Some promises don't echo in words. They settle into wood, into the dust on windowsills, into the grooves of a floor cleaned every morning, even when no one walks on it. That night, the cowboy didn't sleep. The wind had changed, not louder, just different, like a voice cleared of time. The kind of shift you don't hear with your ears, but feel somewhere beneath your ribs. He lit the lantern and sat at the bar, eyes drifting to the same spot they always did around this hour. But tonight, nothing moved. The candle burned steady. The air was still. But something inside him stirred. He stood, not in haste, but with the quiet purpose of a man approaching a grave he dug long ago. And he walked to the far wall. There, half lost in shadow, hung the photograph. It had always been there, slightly tilted, its glass fogged with age. A photograph no one asked about, and until this night, he never truly saw it. He only dusted the frame like a ritual. Now he looked, 13 women, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of this very saloon. Hair pinned up, hats in hand, dresses wrinkled by wind and movement. Some smiled with mischief. Some didn't smile at all. But every one of them looked into the camera like they knew something the world hadn't yet learned. He leaned in closer. Single line, nearly erased by time, was etched in delicate cursive beneath their feet. "We will wait, and you will keep us safe." He said the words out loud. The sentence didn't just sound familiar. It tasted like memory, like dust and whiskey and a night lit only by lamplight and hope. And then it hit him. He'd made a vow 18 years ago. Maybe more. When they stood here for the last time, the 13 of them, and he was younger, with fewer scars and too many jokes. They had danced that night, none of them very well. They drank, laughed, cried for what was ending. They were leaving the town, one by one, called away by the long pull of life. But before they went, they gathered in this saloon and made him promise, keep it open, keep it warm, keep it ours. And he had sworn it, with his hand over his heart and his boot on the rail. No matter what, he'd said, this place will always be waiting. I will always be waiting, he thought. Time had stolen the promise, but the chairs remembered. The bar remembered. And maybe he hadn't really forgotten either, the 12 who had come. They weren't random, they were part of this. Each night, one more glass had appeared. One more step toward a circle long left incomplete. And only one remained. 13. He returned to the bar and set out the final glass. Carefully, quietly. His hands no longer shook. The saloon felt full. Not with people, with promise. And as he stood behind the bar, he whispered into the stillness, I didn't break the promise. I just forgot where to find it. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the wood and dust and lamplight, something answered, not in words, but in the soft shift of air that carries memory home. Some nights begin like endings. The wind didn't blow. The lantern didn't flicker. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of something unnamed, pressing against the saloon walls like a held breath. He felt it before he saw them, all 12. Chairs were already pulled out when he came down the stairs. He hadn't done it. He hadn't even opened the door yet. But they were there, set, waiting, as if time itself had arrived early and rearranged the room. He lit the single candle at the center of the bar. The glass chimed as the match flared. Then he waited. 3 o'clock came, and this time, they didn't arrive one by one. They arrived together. Not with noise, not with footsteps. They simply were. All 12 women, all from before. Each exactly as he remembered. The one with the red scarf. The one with the wild braid. The one who always whistled through her teeth, but never laughed. They didn't speak. Not one word. Not even the whisper of fabric as they moved. They took their seats without hesitation, as if they had never left. As if time had been holding their place all along. The cowboy didn't say anything either. He stood behind the bar, hands resting on the wood worn smooth by years of waiting. He looked at each of them. Not for answers, he knew there were none. Not for blame, there was none of that either. Just recognition. Like hearing the final chord of a song you didn't realize had been playing your whole life. And then she entered. The 13th. Her boots barely touched the floor. Her shadow stretched longer than the walls allowed. She walked without hurry, her eyes never leaving his, and he knew she had been the first to leave. The one who had taken his breath and never given it back. The one whose absence had filled the room more than any presence since. She sat last. And, for a long moment, none of them moved. No one lifted a glass. No one looked away. 13 women, one cowboy, and a promise that had crossed years to find its breath again. He lowered his head, not from shame, not from grief, but from understanding, because he saw it now, what the silence had been building toward. All along, this was the moment, the end of waiting, the closing of the circle. And when he looked up, the room was different. Not brighter, not louder. Just full. Not with sound, but with meaning. The candle's flame stood still. The glasses didn't clink. But something had shifted like a clock finally striking the hour. It had been meant to since the beginning. He didn't cry, but his breath caught in his chest like a child remembering the name of a song his mother used to hum. He whispered, "You came back." No one replied, but every eye answered him, and in that silence something ended, and something else began. The morning sun crept slowly across the sleepy town, spilling light across the dust-choked street and the warped wooden porch of a saloon no one had entered for years, except him. The swinging doors that had once creaked with life now stood, still motionless in the morning breeze, as if holding their breath. It was old Martin, as always, who first passed by. He walked the same path every day, at the same time, always pausing by the saloon to mutter something under his breath. A greeting, perhaps, or maybe just a habit. But today, something was different. The doors were open. The curtains, usually drawn tight, swayed gently in the breeze. The interior was no longer dim, but bathed in a golden wash of sunlight. There was a smell in the air, not dust and old wood, but tea. Freshly steeped, fragrant, welcoming. Martin stepped forward, uncertain. Behind him, the sheriff noticed the stillness too. Then the schoolteacher. Then the preacher. One by one, they came. They didn't speak. They didn't knock. They stepped inside. The saloon was quiet, but not empty. It was full of presence. The kind that lingers after a goodbye has already been said. The bar was clean. Every chair tucked neatly beneath the tables. No spilled whiskey. No overturned stools. No ash in the trays. Just stillness. And on the counter, arranged in perfect symmetry, stood 13 porcelain cups, all filled with warm tea. Not a trace of dust, not a ripple in the liquid, as though someone had just set them there. But there was no one, the cowboy gone. Number, hat, no boots, no jacket on the coat rack, no familiar humming from the back room, no echo of his slow, deliberate steps across the creaking floorboards. And yet, he was everywhere. A presence woven into the wood, the air, the light. The sheriff stepped forward, gently touching the edge of the bar. It was warm. Too warm for a building left untouched. Then they saw it, the photograph. It had always been there, framed and faded, tucked behind layers of dust near the fireplace. For years, it showed a group too smudged to identify faces lost, names forgotten. Now it was clear. 13 women stood behind the bar, shoulder to shoulder, their expressions soft and knowing. In front of them, centered in the frame, stood the cowboy. His hands rested on the counter. His eyes, once weary, now peaceful. The faintest smile curved at the corners of his mouth. No one said a word. The preacher removed his hat. The sheriff swallowed hard. A few others turned away, not in fear, but in awe. It was not a photograph anymore. It was a memory finally fulfilled. The townspeople backed away slowly, their steps careful, as if the floor beneath them held secrets too old to disturb. Outside, the wind carried something faint, perhaps the distant sound of boots, or laughter, or music. The kind you only hear when silence becomes sacred. Martin reached for one of the teacups but stopped. They weren't meant for him. Nothing in the room was. They stepped out,